All right, back for part 3 of the DAC off, and this time I have listened to and compared A-B'd the Schiit Bifrost Multibit to the Cambridge Audio DacMagic 100. I'm not even though I mentioned the prices of these items, of these DACs initially, that it is irrelevant to me. I want the best DAC, and so that's why I'm doing the blind test. And I have some scribbled notes and some conclusions. Let me go ahead and get my tripod. Got some really interesting conclusions on this one. This one kind of, this AB, this evaluation kind of threw me for a bit of a loop. It was, and I'll explain in a minute, there was something that was kind of unexpected. So let me go ahead and get this on a tripod and I'll try to decipher my scribble. Okay, there we go. Get some lights on here. Turn the light on. All right, don't even bother trying to read my scribble here. I'll have to verbalize it as I sit down and listen. I just kind of impulsively take notes, try to, stream of consciousness, try to put down what I'm thinking at the time. And my writing's not that good unless I really take my time. So, all right. So I did an A-B, just like the others. It was blind. I didn't know. I had one of the DACs hooked up to my CD, the other to the tuner. I didn't know which was which. I went back and forth. Both of these DACs, neither of these DACs have a level control, a volume control, so to speak. But yet both were almost identically equalized in level. So I really didn't have to adjust the volume up or down on the amp. So now, just like before, I am going to tell you the winner between the Schiit Bifrost Multibit and the Cambridge Audio DacMagic 100. And the winner is the Schiit Bifrost Multibit. Now, the interesting thing here are the conclusions. And let me just go down bit by bit, and I'll just kind of read my notes in the same order that I actually took them. I did listen to all these songs. I listened to some additional music. Once I get stuck with in Pink Floyd The Wall, I've got to listen to gobs more songs on that album. I love that album. Even to this, timeless. It just never gets old. And I also listened to maybe an hour of country music hits. I do enjoy some country. And some of those country songs are really well recorded, by the way. Good high quality recording. And you can get a good sense for vocals too in some country songs, especially male vocals. And I listened to a little bit of I went on Spotify and turned on Hot Jazz to listen to a little bit of jazz. Got some listening to some horns and some guitar, and some of those jazz recordings are also really well recorded. Excuse me. Okay, so here's the conclusions. With respect to bass slam that hit you in the gut factor, I should write this down right here. Is it SCHIIT? Okay, that's this column here. All right, bass slam, the Cambridge won easily. It had a lot more bass slam. However, as I'm going to explain later, I think it overemphasized the bass way too much. It wasn't flat. So that would be the reason for the bass slam for the Cambridge winning in that department. Bass resolution, on the other hand, the Schiit handily won. And again, all of these comparisons I'm doing back and forth are relative. They're not absolute, meaning that I'm not saying in absolute terms this is what I hear. I'm comparing one to the other. So these are all relative to the other one. Okay. So relative to the Cambridge, the Schiit had much better bass resolution, the ability to resolve into individual bass notes instead of, one lumpy pile of bass. You get very distinct bass notes, go from one to the other. Very, very well done. Bass extension, the Schiit was deeper. I felt bass notes, now aside from the slam part, which might exist in the 40 to 50 to 60 hertz range, the deep bass, those really deep notes, the Schiit went lower. Somehow the Cambridge crapped out in that department. Mid-range, I have here magic quality. There's something in the Schiit that in the mid-range department that was just remarkable. I mean, I can say without even going further in this review, if you really are into mid-range, into voices, and also guitar and horns, not speaker horns, but horns in musical instruments. My God, this DAC might be the best thing ever. Might be. It has a magic quality to it. I'm kind of jumping ahead here. I'm gonna touch on that mid-range and I'm gonna come back to that. Okay, let's go to treble resolution. I couldn't tell the difference. They equally resolved. I always look to hi-hats and cymbals and harmonics from higher guitar notes and the upper end of the human voice. They equally resolved. Okay, the treble clarity. I have this row called clarity accuracy. That's the way I judge that. As I listen to instruments that I'm familiar with. I do play drums. I know what cymbals should sound like, what drums should sound like, and the realism of the Schiit was phenomenal. You always say, well, you want your stereo to make it seem like you're in the room with the musician. So and the Schiit had that quality to it. Dynamics, once again, maybe my ears I don't know, I just couldn't tell the difference in dynamics. They were both dynamic enough to be satisfying, and I couldn't see that there's one better than the other. Now, all this stuff I just discussed all kind of lumps together and aggregates into an overall experience, which is what I have here. I called it listenability or musically satisfying. And the Schiit is the one I'd want to live with easily. There's a quality to it that I just cannot put into words, really. I'm going to try, though. So let me read my notes here. Okay, so muddy for the Cambridge, I felt the bass was relative to the Schiit was muddy, and I felt the treble was hollow. Almost like someone was singing through a tin can, with open ends or something like that. It was kind of like that. The Schiit my first impression was the frequency response, or the way it presented its frequencies relative to the other frequencies, was extraordinarily flat. I felt that everything was presented in the way it should be. Nothing was emphasized or de-emphasized in any manner, too much or too little. I felt if there's such a thing as perfection, I think it achieved it. Again, I wrote down stream of consciousness, magic quality, tube-like. I heard cymbals in a new light. Now, I'm very sensitive to cymbals as a drummer, but I just heard... Now, I don't know whether I'm hearing Schiit's own way of distorting things that I like, or whether it's actually accuracy. But it was a magic quality to it. It was really intoxicating. I mean, it was... I felt, and I didn't write this down, but I felt as though I was not listening to a DAC. Okay, let me give you another analogy. If the Cambridge was... Well, how do I put it? The Cambridge was cold, was like I don't know. The Cambridge was cold and the Schiit was warm and fuzzy. if that makes any sense. You come in out of a cold day and get a, I don't know, a thing of hot chocolate and sit by the fire. That's the shit relative to the Cambridge. And mid-range dynamics on the Schiit was just phenomenal. Just, again, that bodes well to the reproduction of the human voice, and the voices through that were like people were in the room. It was just amazing. Okay, some other notes. Schiit had this is hard to read. It has an ethereal quality, very tube-like, magic quality, and X factor. The vocals were just right. I sensed. Okay, again, I drew my own frequency response curves, not to mimic what I think these things measure. They probably both measure flat. To try to give you a visual image of how I heard or how I perceived frequency emphasis or de-emphasis relative to, you know, each other. And I felt that it was just absolutely flat. What did I write here? Smooth. Sensed some harshness in the treble, but only in loud passages, but just smooth. Whereas the Cambridge, I felt, had a big lumpy pile of gravy as bass, relative to the Schiit now. And I sensed some mid-range emphasis, and then the treble was okay, you know, just kind of flat. What did I write here? I can't read that. Oh, the mids were in the Cambridge were more distant. Even though they were higher in level, they just seemed to be more distant. Again, back to like someone was singing out of a tin can. You know, I can't describe it. So all in all, Schiit wins. Oh, let me show you something. Hang on. I'll show you that in a minute. The Schiit wins. It didn't beat the Cambridge. I'm going to put, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to put down the winners, and I'm going to give you scores as if it was a football. You know, and I'll tell you what the scores were. It didn't win as handily over the Cambridge as the benchmark over the Sonos. Okay, the differences were not that stark, but again, the Schiit had some kind of factor that I really can't put into words. It's just you want to hear it. You want to listen, you know, not listen to it. I don't know how to describe it. You see, I'm really struggling here. Again, the best thing I can say is I didn't feel like I was listening to a DAC. Bottom line. The best way I can describe it from my own experiences is it felt like I was listening to the warmth of a tube amplifier. And I'm not talking about a modern, okay, you have modern tube amplifiers that are so extraordinarily well designed that, you know, the distortions are so low and all that sort of thing that they almost sound transistor. I'm talking about old school tube amps where the distortion, you know, is 0.1%, let's say, and you can actually really hear a tube quality to it. That's the Schiit. I don't know how else to describe it. Maybe I'll come up with a better way to describe it as the Schiit moves on up in the ranks and compares to the higher dollar DACs. I'm not sure. Or maybe what I'm hearing now will be less desirable when I compare this to, for example, the benchmark or the TEC. I don't know. But let's go ahead and do some listening tests. There's two things I want to talk about next before I do the listening test. I've learned from the previous video that the sound quality that came through when I did the listening tests was really not indicative of what I was actually hearing. So I've made some adjustments to my recording process, and it's going to be a lot better. Number one. Now, hang on a second, let me go in the other room. Okay, here we are. And hope the light's good enough in here. We had the benchmark versus the Sonos. If it was a football game, the score would be 49-3. Benchmark moves on in the rankings, right? We have the Schiit versus the Cambridge. The score was 21-7. The Schiit moves on in the ranks. And there we have it. Now, what I'm going to do is to make the sound, to try to give you, and I've experimented, to try to give you a better idea of what I'm hearing, is I've towed the speakers in. Now, these speakers weren't, the clips were not towed in before because I find them to be just right, you know, facing straight out. Horns are very directional. If you tow them in too much, you can get too much in the way of treble, and even you can get some mid-range harshness. Now, these are phenomenal speakers, very little mid-range harshness, but I found them straight out to be fine. However, I suspect because they're horns, well, long story short, I'm towing them in and I'm putting the microphone a little bit closer. I did a sample of it and it sounds great. You'll get a much better idea of what I'm hearing. I'm also going to take the covers off too. That does make a difference with these speakers. Mostly leave them on because this is in the basement and I open that window a lot and you get a lot of dust in here, and I don't want dust getting up into the compression drivers and that sort of thing, but I'll take the covers off for this critical listening test. So I'm going to go ahead and get this rig set up and bounce through a couple songs for you to decide. Okay, it's a nice day here in wherever I live. There's Jasper. Today is a nice day. There's a new gate I built. I had this side of the yard, didn't have a gate. And I had to build this big gate to fit vehicles through. Yeah, it's a monster. That thing was heavy as heck. That wasn't easy building that thing by myself. I really needed two people, but it's working. What do you say, Jasper? What do you say? Huh? I'll tell you what, I've got to go inside, do some recording. You want to stay out here or come in? That's up to you. You decide. Push the door open if you want to come in. Alright, so. Yeah, he's just going to stay out there. You decide, buddy. Alright, well, let's get started with the AB between the Schiit and the Cambridge audio, the speakers towed in, and once I do this, I'll listen to the recording and see if I need to make further adjustments. But the test I did with this, it sounded a whole lot better. You got a much better picture of what the DAC sounded like. I know I'm repeating myself. Okay, get this on the tripod and we'll get started. Okay, here we go. I'm going to begin with the Schiit. And when you hear the pause, I'm switching over to the DacMagic, and you'll just have to track the pauses from there to switch back and forth.
But the horns, they blowing that sound. Way on down south, way on down south, London town. Check it. We don't need no education.
This is the shit.
We don't need no thought control. No dark side in the classroom. Teacher, leave it alone.
This is the shit.
How can you say that you're not responsible? What does it have to do with me? What action? What should it be? Confronted by this latest atrocity. Driven to tears. Driven to tears. Hide my face. Shame wells in my throat. My comfortable existence is just a meaningless part. Seems that when something
This is the Cambridge. Okay, that'll wrap it up. I am going to, since the shit one, and because it had such an interesting magical kind of quality to it, I'm going to put the shit up against the ultimate winner between the TAC, which is coming up next, versus the benchmark. Ciao.